You were never meant to hear this, and by the time you finish listening, something inside you will shift permanently. Somewhere beneath the smooth talk of history books and the sacred silence of state-funded institutions lies a rotting root system, one that fed on obedience, female suffering, and the illusion of moral progress. They called it redemption, but it was a machine, a quiet one, a farm that harvested the futures of girls too poor, too bold, or too inconvenient to fit into the American mold. It's not just about Missouri. This isn't just about one house. What you're about to hear is a blueprint, one that repeats across time, across borders, hidden beneath language like reform, order, obedience. In the quiet farmlands of postbellum America, behind a picket fence and a painted smile, they built a chamber of silence. They called it the Harvest House. And beneath its chapel floors, beneath its orchard rows and its hymns sung under duress, they buried the bodies of girls society deemed too wild, too loud, too alive. This is not a ghost story. This is not a horror tale. This is history, stripped of its lace and polite lies. And if you listen, really listen, you may begin to see how this pattern plays out in your own life, your own institutions, your own country. Because systems of control don't die, they evolve. This isn't just about what they did. It's about what they built, and how we're still walking through it, blindfolded, obedient, and unaware. So, before we descend, mark this moment. This is the last time you'll look at innocence the same way again, and if you're still here when we reach the root, I'll ask you to write a phrase that locks your transformation into stone, but not yet, not until you've earned it. First, we dig. Welcome to the forgotten truth of America's redemption farm, the fire no one investigated because the ashes weren't supposed to be found. The Harvest House was established in 1893 under the banner of faith and restoration. On paper, it was a home for troubled young women, a sanctuary run by the Order of Sanctified Daughters, a Protestant sect with roots in revivalist movements and a taste for penitence disguised as love. The state funded them quietly, proudly. After all, what better way to deal with society's misfits than by cloaking discipline in the language of salvation? The girls came from everywhere, rail yards, brothels, orphan trains, even courtrooms where judges offered them a choice: jail or harvest. Most were between 13 and 19. Many had been assaulted, orphaned, or simply deemed unmanageable. There was no trial, no appeal, just a train ticket to the fields. The public saw whitewashed photos, girls in bonnets holding hymnals, smiling like statues. But inside the wire-fenced perimeter where the girls' names were stripped and replaced with numbers, another world took shape. A world of silence, surveillance, and shadow rituals. Days began at 4:30 a.m. with forced prayer on splintered knees. Breakfast was cold grits, eaten in total silence. Infractions, such as speaking out of turn, refusing to scrub bloodstains from linen, or crying after being caned, were logged in the Book of Correction. For each infraction, privileges were removed. Books, warmth, time outside, sleep. And if a girl resisted too long, she vanished, sent to the red barn at the edge of the cornfields. No one returned from the red barn, ever. The farm produced massive crop yields, corn, soy, apples, all sold at profit by the order. But it wasn't just food they exported. The girls were taught sewing, laundering, and docility. Some were shipped off as domestic apprentices to wealthy families out east. Others were married off at 15 to men with church ties, paperwork forged, consent falsified, wombs controlled. The system fed itself. A misery as input, obedience as output. This wasn't a sanctuary, it was a factory, and like all factories, it left behind waste, graves unmarked, files burned, memories fractured. But one girl, number 27, remembered everything, and when the fire came, it wasn't an accident. It was a reckoning. Her name was Clara May Winslow, but by the time she arrived at Harvest House, her identity had been reduced to a number stitched into a grey muslin shift, 27. She was 16, with sunburnt skin and a voice that could cut through thunder. Her crime? Accusing a local deacon of improper conduct, a sin the courts deemed hers, not his. Clara's mother, unable to pay court fees or bribe the sheriff, was forced to sign the voluntary commitment papers in tears. Clara never saw her again. From her first day inside the gates, Clara noticed things others seemed too broken or terrified to see. The way Sister June's rosary beads left bruises, the way the fields were always ploughed twice when the bishop visited, as if to cover something buried, the way the songs they were forced to sing all ended in unresolved chords. Clara refused silence. She mouthed forbidden questions. Where do the girls go when they don't come back? Why does the chapel smell like rust at night? Why does Sister Agnes have a cellar key with no assigned door? But questions had consequences. She was denied meals, confined to the reflection chamber, a stone cellar with no light and recordings of scripture played on loop. Her hair was shaved, her name erased from the bulletin board. But Clara wrote. On apple crates, on soap scraps, in the margins of discarded Bibles. She carved notes into the backs of hymnals with sewing needles and buried them in the orchard rows under the guise of weeding. She was building a map, one the overseers never noticed. And then came the incident. A new girl, number 34, arrived with bruises and whispers of a pregnancy. Sister Margaret took her to the infirmary. She was never seen again. But Clara found the bloody sheet hidden behind the incinerator. That night she left a message scratched into the chapel's communion table. They bury us, but we are seeds. The next morning she was Dr. Aged to the Red Barn. But Clara didn't scream. She smiled, because she'd already passed the matches, along with her map, to the girl sweeping the floor. And she knew exactly which root to set on fire. They said the fire began in the cornfields, but that was a lie the order told the newspapers. In truth, the first blaze erupted beneath the chapel floorboards where the bones were kept, femurs wrapped in muslin, jawbones marked with initials, and ribs etched with numbers too faded to match any records. Clara had discovered the hidden ossuary weeks before her final punishment, during a cleaning duty assigned after her third hunger strike. Beneath the altar she found a loose plank and a stench that didn't belong to rot alone. It was old terror, soaked into the wood like oil. She left it undisturbed until the day she knew would be her last. That morning, when she handed the hidden map and sulphur-tipped matchsticks to number 11, she whispered a single instruction: light the word. And that afternoon, just after the bell rang for evening hymns, the flame crawled into the chapel's gut and exhaled. Smoke rose black and furious against the purple sky. The girls ran, not in fear, but in unison, like a flock finally unpinned. They knew the plan. Clara's notes had told them which hallways were false, which doors led to exits disguised as broom closets. Sister Agnes tried to ring the alarm bell, but its rope had been soaked in lye. Sister Margaret screamed for the water pump, but the line had been severed near the orchard. The Red Barn was next. It exploded, not from fire, but from pressure. Decades of secrets compressed into barrels buried beneath its floorboards. The order's ledgers, punishment records, and the broken instruments used in corrections had been doused in kerosene and buried shallow. Now they surfaced in a roar of fire and ash. From the far fence, number 11 looked back once. In the blaze she saw Clara, arms stretched wide in the chapel's threshold as if baptizing herself in the smoke. She didn't run. She didn't move. The fire crowned her like a martyr. By morning, the entire compound was ash. 29 girls vanished into the surrounding woods, following the path Clara carved, marked by red thread tied to tree limbs and scraps of hymns rewritten with new endings. The state called it a tragic accident, but in hushed circles across the country stories began to surface, stories of young women appearing at train stations with no last names, only numbers, and fire in their eyes. The first to speak publicly was a woman known only as Sister Ivy, once a warden of Harvest House, now a dying recluse in a crumbling convent far from the public eye. She had not been seen in decades, presumed dead by most. But in the charred wake of the fire, she contacted a fringe journalist named Emery Vance, whose radio broadcasts were banned in 3 states for their talk of state-run asylums and buried scandals. Her voice, brittle and cracking with guilt, told of ritual corrections performed under the guise of salvation, of how girls were fed sedatives before the white rites, a name she never dared explain. Clara knew, she whispered. She knew what was beneath the orchard. She saw the ledger marked in blood. I told them not to mark her for punishment. I told them she was different. Emery aired the interview in full, and the clip went viral in corners of the internet already seething with theories about Harvest House. Reddit threads lit up with speculation. Former students from neighboring Catholic schools came forward with stories of missing sisters, sudden transfers, whispers of girls who bled too much and spoke too little. But the most chilling revelation came not from a survivor, nor a priest, nor even a journalist. It came from a surveyor named Daniel Holt, who'd been contracted by the diocese to inspect the burnt remains of the property before a luxury retreat center could be built. Holt documented his findings in a private memo never meant to be seen, but it leaked when his cousin uploaded it to a forgotten WordPress blog. In the report, Holt described discovering a concrete shaft beneath the chapel ruins. When his team broke through, they found water, black, unmoving, and ice-cold. Floating atop it were pieces of cloth, ribbons, a girl's shoe, and bones, too many bones for any single burial, some wrapped in rosary chains, some with jaw hinges pried open, and as if screaming before death. The shaft had no stairs, no ladder, just a drop. Like a well, Holt wrote, a wishing well built from grief. The diocese sealed the report and threatened legal action, but it was too late. Copies were everywhere. Something had been unearthed, and it wouldn't go back into the dark. And then the sightings began. Girls with shaved heads seen boarding buses in small towns, unregistered patients showing up at hospitals, mouths stitched shut with red thread, all of them bearing the number 27 inked behind one ear. The number 27 became a ghost code whispered across message boards, graffiti tagged beneath overpasses, etched into the dirt on windows of abandoned cars. It wasn't just a symbol of survival, it was a warning. 27 girls had made it out of Harvest House, or so they claimed, but conflicting reports emerged. Some said they saw 30, others swore only 23 ever existed. The records had all been destroyed in the fire, and the order insisted no such number ever lived there. But then came the photograph, grainy, black and white, unearthed in the belongings of a retired mail clerk in Minnesota. He had taken it the year he was hired, tasked with delivering sealed crates to HH on the edge of the county line. He didn't question the destination back then. It was just another envelope, another box. But curiosity got the better of him one winter morning. He opened a crate. Inside, stacked like books, were files marked correctional inventory. And on top of the stack, a photo, 27 girls lined up in 3 rows, their eyes hollow, their uniforms starched, their mouths closed but strained like they'd forgotten how to smile. The most disturbing part was the girl at the end of the front row, her face blurred not from the photo's age, but as if something had interfered with the film itself. A corruption in the image, an erasure. No one could identify her. When uploaded online, AI software failed to reconstruct her face. Her space in the photo seemed to pulse slightly, like the camera had captured movement from a place that shouldn't have allowed it. Reddit users began referring to her as the Forgotten. Soon reports came in of people dreaming of her, always at the edge of their vision, never quite seen. She would be near an open door, fingers twitching against the frame, hair wet like she had just crawled from that underground well. One survivor, identified as Miriam, spoke in a live stream interview that was pulled within hours. There were 27 of us when we escaped, she said, eyes wide, voice trembling. But one of us wasn't real. Clara called her a tether. She walked like us but didn't breathe like us, and when the fire started, she smiled. Then the feed cut, not due to interference but because Miriam stopped speaking. Her mouth froze mid-sentence. Her eyes turned towards something behind the camera, and she began to cry, not from fear but from remembering. Miriam vanished 3 days later. Her apartment door was found ajar, keys still hanging in the lock, dinner cooling untouched on the stove. On the living room wall, written in what authorities claimed was rust, but others insisted was dried blood, was a single line: "The house is not done." Investigators found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no footprints, only the faint scent of lilies, a flower associated with mourning and, disturbingly, often found planted along the borders of the original Harvest House orchard. The internet spiraled into frenzy. Amateur sleuths dissected every frame of Miriam's last broadcast, slowing it down frame by frame. In one looped clip, just as she turns to cry, a figure appears reflected in her window. A girl with cropped hair and eyes like polished obsidian, standing utterly still. Viewers began reporting similar sightings in their own homes, reflections in mirrors that didn't match their movements, shadows behind them that vanished when turned upon. But one clip spread like wildfire. It came from a man named Tyler Grant, a school janitor from Ohio who claimed his niece had recently begun speaking to someone named Clara during her sleep. Clara told her stories of tunnels and bells and needles. Tyler set up a baby monitor with night vision, hoping to capture sleep talking. What he recorded instead chilled viewers to the bone. At precisely 3:07 a.m., the child sat bolt upright and pointed toward the wall. A faint hum began to rise like a choir underwater, and then from the shadows near the closet a hand emerged, long, pale, too many joints, moving not with malice but certainty, like it had done this before. The child whispered, "27 is a lock. We are the key." The video was pulled by moderators within hours, but it had already been mirrored across dark corners of the web. Some said it was faked. Others weren't so sure. Cause in town after town across counties and countries, reports began to rise of sudden fugue states, of girls vanishing for days, then returning with no memory, only to quietly scratch the number 27 into school desks, mirrors, even their own skin. The order remained silent, but one bishop, under pressure during a press conference, finally cracked. "You don't understand," he said, sweat pouring down his face. "Harvest House was never about shelter. It was about containment." Then he collapsed, his lips bleeding, as if he'd bitten off something he wasn't meant to say. In the weeks that followed, unease spread like rot beneath the surface of normal life. Streetlights flickered in patterns, 3 long pulses, 2 short, then silence, that mirrored an old Morse code translation, "Do not remember." Children began drawing the same symbol during recess, a crude house with no windows, only a black square for a door, and a thick X over the roof. Teachers laughed it off as coincidence until one child, 7-year-old Navia from Oregon, dug a hole beneath the jungle gym and buried a sealed mason jar. When found, it contained teeth, 27 of them, cleaned and arranged in a spiral around a damp, handwritten note. "I took theirs so they wouldn't speak." Her parents denied any knowledge. Her dentist later confirmed the teeth did not belong to Navia or any living member of her family. Meanwhile, those who had once worked near the original site of Harvest House reported dreams so vivid they left bruises. One man, a forest ranger named Elijah Kent, went missing after emailing a local news station. In his message, he included GPS coordinates, claiming he'd found a hidden cellar beneath the ashes. His final words were brief. "The girls never escaped. We only thought they did." A search party arrived at the coordinates a day later. What they found wasn't a cellar, but a stone door embedded in the earth, sealed with iron bands etched with the Latin phrase "Veritas Praedam," truth is the prey. The door had no handle, no hinge, yet emitted a constant low vibration like a heartbeat. Wildlife avoided it. Plants around it were dead, their roots turned to ash. One investigator placed his hand upon it and screamed. He clawed at his own ears, mumbling incoherently about bells and hollow rooms and eyes that never blink. He died within 48 hours of what the coroner simply called massive internal disintegration. The order released no statement, but behind closed doors, ex-members whispered about a second house, a prototype facility built before Harvest House, more isolated, more ancient, deep within the black pines. A place never meant to be discovered, a place only one person knew how to find. Clara. The one they tried to erase. The one whose face still twisted film, cracked mirrors, and haunted sleep. And now, it seemed, she was waking up. They called it the Sanctum, a lost structure buried beneath layers of state forest and rewritten cartography, scrubbed from public records sometime in the late 1930s. It wasn't built by the church. Not entirely. Some said it predated even the oldest chapels, constructed by early settlers who'd vanished from history without graves or names, remembered only through symbols carved into oak and bone. Clara was born there, if born was even the right word. She wasn't listed in any birth registry, and no one recalled a mother. But the Order spoke of her in their private codex, not as a girl, but as an event. An anomaly of spirit and sound, first detected when bells in 7 counties rang simultaneously at 3:07 a.m. on the 7th day of the 7th month. No wind, no human hand, just resonance. When investigators arrived at the sanctum, they found Clara seated alone in a pewless chapel, eyes open, mouth moving without breath. A whisper looped endlessly. "We were stitched into the seams. You tore us out." The Order tried to contain her, not out of cruelty but fear. They believed she was a convergence point, a living echo of every forgotten girl buried under their sanctimonious reforms. But containment wasn't erasure. Over time, the sanctum fell into ruin, and Harvest House was built to divert attention, to appease the rituals that once kept Clara dreaming and dormant. But now the rituals had frayed, the girls had spoken, and the boundary was thinning. Reports surfaced from disparate corners, tunnels unearthed beneath suburban schools, ancient hymnals found etched into subway walls, and a persistent clicking sound on phone lines that technicians couldn't trace. Linguists eventually identified the clicking as a kind of reverse Morse code, relaying phrases not in English but an archaic dialect traced to 16th century witch trials. The phrases translated to commands: dig, open, unbury. Children began responding in kind, speaking phrases in their sleep they'd never learned, humming melodies that hadn't been heard since the sanctum was sealed. One girl, Cassie Lorne, age 6, was found reciting the names of all 27 original occupants of Harvest House in perfect order, even though the official list was never released publicly. When asked how she knew, she smiled and said, "They're coming back to finish the story. I just help with the remembering." Then she giggled, and in a voice not her own added, "So do you." By the time the first documented return occurred, it was already too late to contain the phenomenon. In a quiet Midwestern town, beneath a decommissioned convent-turned-library, workers unearthed a room sealed in concrete with no doors and no ventilation. Inside it, perfectly preserved, was a school desk. And in the desk, Clara's final map. Not a diagram of roads or tunnels, but a diagram of time, a spiral of initials, birth dates and symbols scrawled in circles that expanded outward like a pulse. Historians tried to dismiss it as a hoax. But then came the fire in Devonshire, where 27 girls vanished from a state-run reform school, just like they had at Harvest House. No bodies were found, only ash, and a single phrase burned into the walls of the gymnasium. She woke up. Surveillance footage went missing. Witnesses refused to speak. Even the coroner who arrived on scene collapsed without explanation, clutching a rosary that wasn't his. It wasn't just Clara anymore. It was what she'd awakened, a chorus stitched together from the pain of a century. These weren't hauntings. They were restorations, truths returning like floodwater, forgotten girls showing up in census photos they were never in, church bells ringing backwards, wooden dolls turning up on doorsteps with names carved into them, names of girls who died in silence. Priests began disappearing. Entire institutions fell into disrepair, their funding mysteriously cut, their foundations cracked as if by pressure from below. The Order, once vast and untouchable, had been reduced to a whisper network. They moved underground, conducting rituals with red wax and blindfolds, trying to stall what they now called the reweaving. But every ritual ended the same way, with a burning scent and a child's voice laughing where no child should be. Clara's legend grew, not as a martyr, but as a mirror. She didn't seek ravine, she returned memory. She unearthed what was buried in people's homes, in their bloodlines, in their dreams. And once something was remembered, it couldn't be unremembered. People reported visions of hands reaching from mirrors, of lullabies sung in unfamiliar tongues, of staircases that didn't exist the night before. And always, just before waking, they would see her, A girl with no name left, staring straight through them, whispering, "Help me finish what you started." The government, of course, refused to acknowledge the pattern, but internally a task force had been formed, Project Solace, composed of linguists, occult historians, disavowed clergy, and a retired cardinal who hadn't spoken aloud in 15 years. They operated out of an abandoned missile silo in Montana. Their mission was singular, to contain the Clara phenomenon. They analyzed her writings, carbon-dated her carvings, and even attempted to replicate the memory events using sensory deprivation and electromagnetic stimulation. Every trial ended the same, subjects emerging in silence, drawing spirals on the walls, whispering numbers that aligned with missing persons cases dating back to 1864. But the most disturbing finding came not from their tests, but from the Vatican's secret archives, illegally leaked by an archivist who vanished hours later. It was a letter dated July 4, 1847, addressed to Pope Pius IX. It described a girl at a French convent who predicted the burning of Harvest House 60 years before it existed. She drew the same map. She called herself Clara. Her body was never found. This wasn't reincarnation, it was persistence, like an echo becoming louder each time it repeats. Clara, or whatever force wore her face, didn't obey time. She circled it. Every century she returned in different skin, but with the same purpose, to unbury what the powerful hid. She wasn't a ghost, she was a continuity error. And now she was accelerating. Reports of mass dream-sharing spiked. Children in foster care recited Latin verses they'd never learned. A rural church in Croatia collapsed overnight, revealing a burial chamber beneath with 27 coffins, each marked only with numbers and a burned symbol shaped like an eye. And the dreams. Oh, the dreams. A hallway of doors, none of which open. A staircase made of teeth. A child at the end, holding a match and asking, "G, are you ready to see?" The order began to fracture. Its highest members fled, changed names, burned their own records. But it didn't matter, because Clara didn't need names anymore. She had the map, and every time someone remembered a story they'd been told to forget, every time a journal was found, a photograph undeveloped, a bone unearthed, another line on that spiral lit up. Clara wasn't haunting the past, she was rewriting the present. Deep in the pine forests of northern Maine, where frost clings to the windows year-round and the sky hangs like lead, the last known convent tied to Harvest House still stood, weather-worn, unmarked, and deliberately erased from all public records. Locals called it the Still Place, though no one remembered why. Generations had passed since anyone claimed to see smoke from its chimneys or heard bells toll from its rusted spire. But then, on the winter solstice of 2024, a group of hikers found a girl in a white shift standing barefoot at the tree line. Her lips were blue, her eyes grey, no footprints behind her. She only said one word: 17. Authorities brought her in. No matches in any database, no signs of malnutrition, though she bore the wrist scars of restraint. When asked where she was from, she smiled and said, "From beneath your forgetting." She didn't eat, didn't sleep. She wrote constantly, in long spirals that filled wall after wall of the holding facility. Thousands of names, most of them dated to missing persons cases stretching back decades. Then the facility lost power. For 12 minutes the security feeds captured only static. When the lights returned, every wall was blank, every door unlatched, and the girl was gone. The only trace she left behind was a single photo printed from an unplugged machine, an aerial view of the still place, with a circle drawn in red ink around the chapel's roof. Investigators dispatched a team. What they found beneath that roof was impossible, a descending stairwell that hadn't existed on any blueprints. It led to a chamber lined with beds, 27 of them. Each bed was marked with a number and a date burned into the wood. All dates were solstices. And in the center of the room, a mirror, antique, spider-cracked and humming. One agent, a former army codebreaker, approached it, his final radio transmission. "It's not a mirror, it's a lock, and she's the key." Then silence. A week later, his wife received a box in the mail. no return address. Inside, his badge, his wedding ring, and a note in a child's handwriting. "You can bury what you've done, but we'll always dig it up." Clara wasn't hiding anymore. She was knocking on every door that had ever tried to shut her out. In the wake of the Still Place incident, federal attention turned toward quiet corners long left undisturbed. A black site task force dubbed Echo Lantern was established to trace anomalous events linked to redemption programs defunded after the 1950s. What they uncovered sent fractures through the intelligence community itself, ritualistic programs cloaked as rehabilitation centers, all tracing their lineage to one root, the original Missouri Harvest House, but not the above-ground structure. The real operation was beneath it. And according to a decrypted communiqué dated 1899 titled Sanctum Vitae, the facility's founders believed in more than moral reform. They believed in transference. Not metaphorical but spiritual, a literal harvesting of wayward vitality through suffering, silence, and scripted purification. Echo Lantern's linguists confirmed the doctrine's language. The defiled shall be wrung clean, and their virtue passed upward to the chosen. The phrase appeared in 6 other locations across Oregon, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, and 2 sites in Canada. The targets were always the same: orphaned girls, disabled women, single mothers. They were labeled sinners, locked away and siphoned dry. Their pain wasn't incidental, it was the point. But what disturbed investigators most wasn't the doctrine itself, it was the math. Each sanctum recorded purification yields based on an esoteric calculation involving lunar cycles, trauma thresholds, and something ominously called the mirror index. The math aligned across centuries, across victims, and most chillingly, across outcomes. Clara's reappearance wasn't an anomaly, it was a scheduled return, one that the index had predicted precisely 111 years after her presumed death. According to a hidden clause in the Sanctum Vitae scrolls, once the index breaks open under its own weight, the system begins to collapse inward. Releasing everything it once suppressed, meaning every voice silenced, every identity erased would begin to surface, unpredictably, violently, and in ways reality couldn't hold. The Echo Lantern team sent one final message before their servers were permanently wiped. The system wasn't built to contain corruption, it was built to farm it. We are living in its byproduct, and Clara isn't alone anymore. Hours later, Echo Lantern headquarters burned to the ground. Witnesses said the flames were blue, and from the smoke, figures walked backward into the woods, holding hands, eyes closed, as if following the sound of something long buried finally calling them home. Across the sea, in an abandoned Jesuit monastery perched above the cliffs of County Kerry, Ireland, a monk named Father Lorien awoke from a dream he had recorded in a leather-bound journal every night for 31 years. The dream never changed. A girl with white eyes standing at the mouth of a well, holding out a mirror with no reflection. For decades, Father Lorien assumed it was madness, a remnant of his time in the psychiatric wards of London after the war. But on the night Echo Lantern burned, the dream shifted. The girl spoke. Her words were muffled as though echoing through wet stone. "They've opened the gate. We're all coming through." That same night, the monastery's bell, untouched for 200 years, rang 13 times without wind. When Lorien stumbled into the chapel, he found symbols carved into the pews, identical to those found in the Sanctum Vitae scrolls. He wrote a final journal entry before vanishing. The blood harvest was never about cleansing sin. It was about distilling memory, purifying pain until it could be rebottled, sold, weaponized. Clara is only the first uncorked. Thousands of miles away, back in Missouri, the old Harvest House land, sold to a real estate developer, was being surveyed for a luxury resort. But when excavation began for the main building's foundation, the team hit a structure they couldn't identify. Beneath layers of concrete and earth was a sealed iron vault with a wheel-lock mechanism and no keyhole. Its outer shell bore no inscriptions, except for a crude engraving that read, "Do not unchain what remembers your name." The foreman, skeptical and running behind schedule, ordered it blown open. That night, 5 crew members went missing. Their clothes were found neatly folded atop the empty vault. Surveillance footage showed the explosion, dust and silence, then static. But for 7 seconds before the feed cut out, a figure stood at the edge of the site, back turned, arms lifted as if conducting a choir. When agents reviewed the footage, their analysis software flagged a sound previously unheard, a dissonant hum that, when isolated and translated through phonetic spectrogram, formed a Latin phrase, redemptio inverso, redemption reversed. Every location tied to the Sanctum doctrine has since reported similar auditory phenomena, whispers in walls, reflections that blink out of sync, and most often the face of a white-eyed girl peering through surveillance screens moments before they shatter. In the sealed archives beneath the Vatican, hidden behind 4 layers of biometric locks and accessible only to the High Inquisitor, lies a crimson-bound ledger known as De Vermis Requiem. It was recovered during the final days of World War II from a manor outside Dresden, where Nazi occultists had been conducting experiments on what they called ancestral resonance, the theory that traumatic memory, if harnessed properly, could grant influence over time and perception. The manuscript was said to be dictated by a child who had never spoken a word aloud, her body preserved in salt and iron, her mouth stitched closed with blackthorn. The pages pulse faintly under ultraviolet light, as if alive, and detail rituals almost identical to those practiced by the Ashfords centuries prior. The same sacrifice, the same mirror, the same gate. A cardinal assigned to translate the text went blind within 3 days. His final notes claimed the book didn't just contain rituals, it responded to them, that it rewrote itself depending on who held it. When the Inquisition cross-referenced names from the ledger, one appeared repeatedly across time, continents and languages: Clara. In each case, the name was followed by a date, always 7 days before a documented disaster: fires, plagues, earthquakes, even mass disappearances. The Vatican quietly contacted the last living Ashford descendant, now living under a false identity in a psychiatric facility in Finland. She refused to speak, drawing only one symbol over and over on her cell wall, a circle with a split down the center and a dot on either side. When a priest showed her an image of Clara, she began to scream, clawing at her own eyes until restrained. Her final words before sedation: "She's not a girl. She's the echo of something that died angry." Meanwhile, back in Missouri, every mirror on the resort property cracked simultaneously. At 3:33 a.m., workers began hearing music underground, a lullaby in a language none recognized but all could hum. Children of the nearby town started drawing symbols in ash and bone, claiming the lady in the ground taught them. And at the heart of it all, the iron vault sat open, empty, cold but humming, as if something inside had simply stepped out and left the door ajar. In the sealed archives beneath the Vatican, hidden behind 4 layers of biometric locks and accessible only to the High Inquisitor, lies a crimson-bound ledger known as De Vermis Requiem. It was recovered during the final days of World War II from a manor outside Dresden, where Nazi occultists had been conducting experiments on what they called ancestral resonance, the theory that traumatic memory, if harnessed properly, could grant influence over time and perception. The manuscript was said to be dictated by a child who had never spoken a word aloud, her body preserved in salt and iron, her mouth stitched closed with blackthorn. The pages pulse faintly under ultraviolet light, as if alive, and detail rituals almost identical to those practiced by the Ashfords centuries prior. The same sacrifice, the same mirror, the same gate. A cardinal assigned to translate the text went blind within 3 days. His final notes claimed the book didn't just contain rituals, it responded to them, that it rewrote itself depending on who held it. When the Inquisition cross-referenced names from the ledger, one appeared repeatedly across time, continents and languages: Clara. In each case, the name was followed by a date, always 7 days before a documented disaster: fires, plagues, earthquakes, even mass disappearances. The Vatican quietly contacted the last living Ashford descendant, now living under a false identity in a psychiatric facility in Finland. She refused to speak, drawing only one symbol over and over on her cell wall, a circle with a split down the center and a dot on either side. When a priest showed her an image of Clara, she began to scream, clawing at her own eyes until restrained. Her final words before sedation: "She's not a girl. She's the echo of something that died angry." Meanwhile, back in Missouri, every mirror on the resort property cracked simultaneously. At 3:33 a.m., workers began hearing music underground, a lullaby in a language none recognized but all could hum. Children of the nearby town started drawing symbols in ash and bone, claiming the lady in the ground taught them. And at the heart of it all, the iron vault sat open, empty, cold but humming, as if something inside had simply stepped out and left the door ajar. A week after the vault opened, surveillance drones deployed over the Ashford estate began vanishing from the radar one by one, without any sign of interference. The last drone transmitted a single frame before going dark, an image so distorted the analysts initially dismissed it as corrupted data. But when enhanced, the picture revealed a figure standing in the center of the Ashford courtyard, barefoot, cloaked in black, face obscured by a veil of fine hair. Around her, the ground was fractured, rising in jagged shards like broken glass pushing upward. She appeared to be humming, the same lullaby noted by children in the nearby town. Linguists brought in to analyze the melody traced it to a Sumerian mourning dirge sung only during funerals of royalty, yet the dialect had never been recorded outside of cuneiform tablets. Meanwhile, across Europe, seismic anomalies began forming spiral patterns in the Earth's crust. Iceland, the Alps, southern Greece, each marked by localized tremors, untraceable to tectonic movement. At the epicenter of every spiral was an abandoned manor once connected to the Ashford bloodline. One house had burned down in the 1600s, another had been bombed in World War I, yet somehow within each ruin investigators found freshly burned candles arranged in perfect circles and bone fragments too new to match the structure's ages. At a military base outside Prague, a colonel monitoring global threat assessments went missing after viewing decrypted transmissions from the Vatican's Black Archive. His desk was found covered in charcoal sketches of a woman with no eyes, her hands sewn into her mouth. His final entry in the security log read, "She's waking up faster now. We shouldn't have opened the gate." Unbeknownst to global authorities, a council of private industrialists, calling themselves the Folded Circle, had already begun assembling on an oil rig diverted into a floating temple in the North Sea. They believed Clara was not a threat, but a vessel, a relic of the original design of human consciousness, one uncorrupted by synthetic time or artificial memory. They called her the memory of the first wound, and they had plans to offer her a gift: 7 children born in silence, raised without mirrors, and taught to forget their names. They believed this would complete the ritual Clara had been waiting centuries to finish. The first child was delivered beneath a blood moon aboard the rig's central chamber, an altar of bone-white metal carved with glyphs older than the Indo-European language tree. No doctors were present, only midwives trained in rituals traced back to the hidden Codex of Ur, and a blind woman known only as Mother Fen, who claimed to be the last surviving member of the Ashford inner line. The child did not cry at birth. Instead, it opened its eyes, deep black, lidless, like a reflection of space, and stared at each of the 7 priests present. One collapsed instantly. Another wept uncontrollably until his throat ruptured. The rest simply fell to their knees, unable to move. Mother Fen whispered in a language no microphone could capture, and the child blinked once before closing its eyes. It would not open them again until the day Clara called. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, birds began dying in perfect circles around water sources. Biologists were baffled. There were no toxins, no visible trauma, just the scent of burnt myrrh and the faint echo of what sounded like a heartbeat in the earth. At CERN, a particle physicist disappeared after his security badge was found inside the Large Hadron Collider's maintenance hatch. Scrawled on the wall in his handwriting was a phrase, "She's not coming through, she's already here." Panic was brewing behind locked doors, but nothing was announced publicly. In the private chambers of the Folded Circle, the other 6 children were delivered, each one stranger than the last. One was born with translucent skin and no shadow. Another refused to sleep, instead humming sequences of ancient number patterns through the night. The sixth child never aged past infancy, yet could speak in full sentences by its third week. All 7 were marked behind the left ear with a faint spiral, identical to the ash pattern left after Clara's awakening. On the pattern rig, the circle began their final phase. A massive iron sphere, forged from meteorite fragments and submerged in the abyssal trench beneath them, was slowly rising. It had taken 17 years to construct, guided by equations found in a lost Da Vinci notebook and dictated visions from Fenn's dreams. They called it the vessel, its purpose to house Clara's next form. For she was not meant to remain in flesh. She was never supposed to. She was only passing through. The vessel emerged on the 49th day of Clara's silence. Its surface hissed with a strange frost that burned skin on contact but left no visible injury. Deep etchings pulsed dimly like embers, and sounds, unmistakably vocal yet not human, echoed from within it, even though it had no discernible opening. Cameras refused to function within a 20-foot radius. The footage scrambled, audio devolved into reversed whispers, and machinery corroded at triple speed. The Ashfords gathered around it with reverence, but not without fear. Clara had remained in her chamber unmoving, her breath now imperceptible. Her body, though untouched by time, felt less and less organic. Skin cool and greyish. Hair no longer grew. Fingertips sharp as if crystallized. But her eyes had begun to glow faintly in the dark, and when spoken to, her presence pressed into the mind like a dense fog of static and grief. The circle convened in what they called the Hollow Room, a space built entirely of soundproof basalt, with no corners and a single dim bulb suspended in saline vapor. Mother Fenn led the ritual that night. She claimed Clara's soul, if it could be called that, was no longer tethered to her form but was moving into a transitional field within the vessel. "She is not dying," Fenn rasped. "She is folding." They began to chant, not with voices, but with thought, synchronized through the neural network implants given to them years before by the Technotheos cult in Iceland. The chanting reached a crescendo when the vessel cracked, not broke, cracked, like an eggshell under pressure. A mist erupted, dense and greenish gold, smelling faintly of rust and jasmine. At that precise moment across the world, every Ashford bloodline member, no matter how far removed, fell into a deep, synchronized trance. Some woke screaming gibberish, others didn't wake at all. In the Louvre, a previously unknown Da Vinci sketch began bleeding from the eyes of the Madonna. In Peru, an Andean shepherd found an obsidian idol pulsing beneath his flock. The sun rose 20 minutes late over Antarctica. And Clara opened her mouth, not her eyes, and let out a sound no ear was meant to hear. Several circle members died instantly, one aged 50 years in seconds. Mother Fenn merely smiled and whispered, "She's begun uncoiling." The Ashfords didn't sleep after that night, not because they feared what dreams might bring, but because sleep no longer came. Something had shifted in their biology. Tests confirmed elevated dopamine and cortisol, yet their bodies showed no fatigue, no need for rest. Clara, now kept submerged in a liquid alloy the family called memory wine, emitted a constant low hum that interfered with GPS satellites within a 12-kilometer radius. Birds avoided the estate. The earth beneath the manor hardened unnaturally, resisting excavation or drilling. It was as if the soil itself had become self-aware. The vessel was moved into the Catacomb Library, a hidden vault beneath the estate containing forbidden texts bound in materials no one could identify. Books that had not been opened in centuries because doing so caused immediate brain hemorrhage. But now the books opened themselves when placed near the vessel. Pages fluttering, ink glowing like bioluminescent algae. The circle interpreted this as Clara's awakening consciousness trying to communicate, but not with them, with whatever was waiting on the other side. Journal entries from the eldest Ashford line, written in dead languages, began rewriting themselves. The phrase, "the fold shall inherit the rootless," appeared repeatedly, etched into mirrors, scrawled in frost on windows, even spoken in reversed Latin by children in towns 20 miles away. Priests who attempted to enter the estate suffered spontaneous blindness. One nun began levitating and speaking in binary, and always the vessel pulsed, a rhythm that mimicked a heartbeat, but not Clara's. It beat slower, deeper, like the pulse of something buried miles beneath the ground. The family's dogs wailed for hours, then vanished. No blood, no bodies, just the sound of claw marks on the walls, spiraling inward. Mother Fen called a halt to all external contact. "We are no longer a family," she told the circle. "We are a conduit. Our veins are no longer our own." That night, each Ashford member received a black envelope under their door. Inside, a single strand of Clara's hair and a sentence inked in what appeared to be melted onyx: "Swallow and see." Those who obeyed reported visions of collapsing cities, winged geometries in the sky, and a figure walking backward through time wearing Clara's face. Those who refused, they were never seen again. By the winter solstice, the town of Wensbrook ceased to exist on any official map. Search engines returned errors. Satellite images displayed only dense fog or static interference. Those who tried to visit found their GPS loops endlessly, rerouting through back roads that led to nowhere. Still, the Ashfords remained within the manor, now referred to only as the core. Beneath the house, the catacomb library began to change. Shelves rearranged themselves. Books whispered in tones that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the nervous system. Clara's body inside the vessel became translucent, revealing a second skeleton, smaller, serpentine, nestled inside her ribcage. On December 23rd, the sun failed to rise over the estate. Instruments confirmed it was shining elsewhere, but above the Ashford grounds, only a black aurora swirled, shaped like a keyhole. Within the core, the family's rituals intensified. They no longer spoke aloud. Instead, communication occurred through vibrations of their teeth, inaudible to outsiders but clear as thunder within. Visitors, if any dared, reported music vibrating from the walls. Melodies so beautiful they induced sobbing, followed by nosebleeds and long-term memory loss. The surrounding wildlife adapted or vanished. Deer grew extra eyes. Crows nested in symmetrical spirals. The trees bent toward the house unnaturally, as if listening. Inside, the Ashfords stood before the vessel each night, hands bleeding into brass bowls carved with Clara's initials. The bowls never filled. And always the phrase returned, written in frost, blood, or etched into glass: "The fold shall inherit the rootless." Mother Fen, once elegant and sharp-tongued, now moved without walking. Her feet hovered inches from the floor and her eyes no longer blinked. "She's almost ready," she murmured one evening, standing at the edge of the vessel where Clara's heart-shape. Defay stared up through the liquid with a knowing smile. That night, thunder cracked above the manor, though no clouds gathered. One bolt struck the old Ashford family tree, splitting it down the center. Inside the trunk was a stairway that hadn't been there before. Fen turned to the family and whispered, "We go down, not up," as it always was. They descended into the tree, into the bone-lined throat of the earth, as the vessel behind them cracked for the first time. From within, Clara blinked, and the temperature in every home within 100 miles dropped by 10 degrees. The stairwell inside the tree defied geometry. Though carved from roots and compacted marrow, it spiraled inward like a helix, unraveling into infinite descent. With every step the Ashfords took, time unraveled. Watches reversed, scars disappeared, memories from lifetimes not their own flickered through their minds like lanterns glimpsed through fog. Father Thorn led, clutching an obsidian lantern filled not with flame but with liquid shadow that dripped upward. Fen floated behind him, her hands folded, eyes shut, murmuring a hymn older than human vocal cords. Behind them came Elias, the archivist's son, clutching a tome bound in skin that screamed when it touched the cold air. The path grew narrow and breathless. Walls pulsated, lined with veins that beat to an arrhythmic pulse, Clara's pulse. Each heartbeat echoed through the stairwell, shaking the souls of her family with its message. "You are not descending. You are becoming hollow." At the base there was no floor, only a black mirror stretched across space, reflecting not their faces, but their regrets. Fen stepped onto it first. Her reflection showed her as a girl standing in front of a cradle, making a silent choice. Thorn followed. His image flickered between a soldier, a priest, a traitor. Elias trembled as his reflection showed him reading a forbidden sentence that ended his previous life. They stood together in the center. The mirror rippled. A voice, not from above or below, but from inside their bones, spoke. "The rootless must pay the toll. Who among you carries the wound unhealed?" Without a word, Elias stepped forward and slit his palm. The blood dripped onto the mirror, which drank it eagerly. The surface cracked, not like glass, but like a scream splitting open. From within the cracks, something vast exhaled. Suddenly the Ashfords stood not beneath a tree, but in a chamber shaped like a cathedral made of vertebrae. At the altar floated Clara, awake, her eyes burning violet, her body no longer that of a girl, but of something ancient and angular. Her voice arrived not as sound, but as memory. "You came. You bore the ache. Now I bear the name." As she raised her hand, every Ashford dropped to their knees, not in worship but in programmed reverence. And above them, from the bone-vaulted ceiling, thousands of mouths opened at once and began to hum Clara's lullaby backward. The chamber grew colder as the backward lullaby echoed, not just through the room but through their marrow. Each inverted note peeled away a layer of identity from the Ashfords, revealing something more primal beneath, neither beast nor spirit, but the raw architecture of will. Clara descended, hovering inches above the altar. Her body flickered with impossible geometries, as though her form was only partially bound by time. "I am not your daughter," she said without speaking. "I am the fracture you cultivated." Thorn tried to rise, tried to speak, but his jaw locked in place as if seized by unseen hands. Fenn's eyes filled with blood, her sockets weeping red tears, yet she whispered the unholy litany that held the chamber together. Elias, frozen in half-breath, felt the tome in his hands pulse violently. Its pages flipped without wind, landing on a page inked in bone ash. On it was a diagram, the family tree, not of lineage, but of decay. Clara's name burned at its root, the trunk forged from betrayal, the branches twisted by secrecy. "You bred me to be your sacrifice." Clara's presence hissed into their thoughts. "But you gave me too much memory, too much wrath. I became more than your offering." The chamber darkened further, the ceiling vanishing into an obsidian sky pierced by constellations shaped like scars. The thousands of mouths above chanted in reverse, faster now, like a spell accelerating toward collapse. Clara raised her hand again. The bones of the cathedral groaned and bent inward, reshaping into a spiral, the same spiral as the stairwell, as the family crest, as the scar burned into each Ashford child at birth. "It ends where it began," she said. "Inside the wound." The altar split open, revealing a vast pit lined with mirrors that reflected futures that never happened, Thorn walking away from the ritual, Fenn burning the book, Elias choosing silence. Clara stepped over the pit, suspended by her own hatred. She looked down. "To reclaim what was stolen, I must become what you feared most." The pit responded, not with flame or shadow, but with light, blinding, searing truth. The kind that does not illuminate but annihilates falsehoods. One by one the Ashfords screamed, not from pain but from memory being forcibly restored. Every lie they lived, every secret they swore to bury, rose from the pit in voices that belonged to the dead. The mirrors around the pit cracked as the truth surged upward, a tsunami of unfiltered recollection. Elias collapsed, the weight of forgotten confessions hammering into his chest. His silence as a boy, while the rituals consumed another sibling, his complicity masked as obedience. Fenn clawed at her own skin, trying to rip free from the tattoos inked in childhood, glyphs she once believed were symbols of protection, but now pulsed with parasitic control. Thorn's eyes rolled back, not from pain, but from the terror of his own invention. He had forged Clara's fate under the guise of prophecy, when in truth it was ambition veiled in doctrine. The pit did not devour, it revealed. And what it showed was unbearable. The dead rose, not in flesh, but in resonance. The voices of the children lost over centuries, all born Ashford, all sacrificed for longevity, wealth, and hidden influence. Their laments harmonized with the backward lullaby until it became a perfect inversion. Pain as music, guilt as rhythm. Clara turned slowly, her form more abstract now, her limbs trailing whispers, her eyes reflecting all outcomes at once. "You sowed this garden with blood," she said, hovering over her creators. "Now taste its fruit." From her chest burst a black flower, its petals etched with timelines, each one a divergent path denied by the choices the Ashfords made. The flower pulsed, releasing spores of remembrance. When they touched the living Ashfords, visions flooded in. Thorn saw a version of Clara raised without doctrine, laughing beneath autumn trees. Fen saw herself burning the archives, walking into exile instead of orchestrating sacrifice. Elias saw silence replaced with defiance, a young boy slapping the book from his father's hand. These were lives that could have been, lives the Ashfords destroyed to preserve a legacy of horror. But the greatest truth the pit revealed was this: the I had never been cursed. There was no divine mandate, no spectral force driving their rituals. The evil had always been them. Clara descended slowly into the pit, the mirrors rearranging into a spiral as she passed. "You were never haunted," she whispered as she vanished into the light. "You were architects." Then silence. No explosion, no collapse, just stillness. The Ashfords remained kneeling, paralyzed by revelation, hollowed out by the one thing they had buried deeper than bones, the truth. The silence stretched, unnatural and suffocating, pressing down on the Ashfords like an invisible weight. The great chamber was no longer echoing with chants or cries. It was mute, as though the house itself had stopped breathing. Elias rose first, though barely. His joints ached, not from age but from memory, each movement unraveling a knot of guilt too long ignored. Fen remained curled in fetal posture, muttering fragmented scripture, her once clear voice now reduced to murmurs of doubt and dread. Thorn stared at the blackened roots that had sprouted from the ground where Clara had stood, pulsing faintly like veins feeding on shame. The pit no longer glowed, but neither was it empty. A faint shimmer danced across its surface, not unlike water trembling before a storm. The truth had undone them, but it had not freed them, for freedom requires atonement, and none among them had begun to pay. "We have to seal it," Elias rasped, though no one responded, "before it spreads." But even as he said it, he knew the infection had already passed through stone and soil and memory. The house had no foundation anymore. It stood atop consequence. Thorn turned at last, his face drawn and aged a decade. "You still don't understand," he said softly. "This wasn't just a reckoning. This was an invitation." Elias narrowed his eyes. "To what?" Thorn looked at the spiral of cracked mirrors and the ghost flower still blooming black. "To descend." And then he stepped forward. Fen's head snapped up, clarity briefly returning to her eyes. "Don't," she whispered, but it was already too late. Thorn's foot touched the edge of the pit and the shimmer swallowed him. No scream, no sound, just a flicker, and then he was gone. The spiral tightened, the mirrors sealing over the void with a chime like distant bells. In their place appeared a surface, obsidian, smooth and reflective. Elias approached it, hesitant, and saw not his face, but a dozen versions, some noble, some monstrous, all possible. Fen crawled forward beside him, her hands trembling. "We have no right to choose anymore," she said, voice hollow. "We forfeited that." Elias nodded slowly. "But someone will." Behind them, in the corridor beyond the chamber, small footsteps echoed. Not ghostly, real, a child's. The house had opened again, not to curse but to call. The bloodline may end, but the story never would. The footsteps belonged to a girl, no more than 10, barefoot, with tangled hair and a face too calm for her age. She stepped into the chamber without fear, her eyes absorbing the shattered history before her without blinking. Elias and Fen froze. The girl looked from them to the sealed pit, then to the obsidian mirror still humming with silent life. "You called me," she said, voice low but certain. Elias stepped forward, desperate and shaking. You shouldn't be here. You don't understand what this place is. The girl tilted her head. I understand enough. I dreamed of it for years. The voices told me the path. Fen reached out a trembling hand. What's your name, child? The girl ignored the question and instead pointed to the ceiling where the faded mural of the Ashford tree had begun to change. New branches appeared, branches that twisted downward rather than up. You think this was the end, she whispered. But this was only the surface. She walked to the mirror and knelt. They left a gate, not a grave. Elias dropped to his knees. You don't know what's behind it. I saw it. I lived it. It's madness and ruin. The girl traced a finger along the edge of the black glass, and where her skin met the surface, a soft golden glow sparked. It's choice. That's what they feared. That's why they buried it. Fen was crying now, wordlessly, memories crashing into her like waves she could no longer hold back. You're one of us, she whispered. A descendant? The girl didn't answer. She stood and placed her hand flat on the mirror. I'm what comes after. With that, the obsidian dissolved into liquid shadow, and a low hum filled the air, not discordant this time, but melodic, harmonic, like a chorus rising from ancient stone. Elias wanted to run, to stop her, to smash the glass before more evil could pour out, but his body would not obey. He was rooted, his soul snared in fate. The girl stepped into the dark, vanishing without a sound. The mirror solidified again. A moment passed. Then across its surface letters began to carve themselves in dripping ash. The house remembers. The blood repeats. Behind them every door in the manor creaked open simultaneously. Fen whispered, It's starting again. Elias closed his eyes and for the first time prayed not for forgiveness, but for oblivion. The house pulsed with life, not in the way a living thing breathes, but in the rhythm of something awakening from centuries of calculated silence. The floors groaned with footsteps that had not yet arrived, windows darkened though the sun was still high, and voices whispered from the chimneys like soot returning to the lungs of the dead. Fen turned sharply as the scent of fire and old perfume filled the air. She's opened it, she muttered. Not just the gate. They'll all come now. Elias stared blankly at the obsidian mirror, now dull and inert as if it had never changed. But the writing remained, pulsing faintly with a heartbeat not their own. The house remembers. The blood repeats. He repeated the words aloud, each syllable dry as ash. Fen took his hand, her eyes brimming with a knowing grief. We have to find her, before the house binds her to it. But even as she spoke, the walls were shifting. The architecture groaned and reassembled. Halls extended endlessly, staircases twisted downward in spirals that led nowhere and everywhere. The manor was no longer just a building. It was a labyrinth of memory and punishment. They stepped into the corridor that had once led to the entrance, but now opened into a long gallery of portraits. Each frame wept black ichor, each painted face now animate and watching. One frame, massive and newly emerged, showed the young girl standing in a great hall bathed in firelight. Behind her stood the entire Ashford lineage, spectral, rotten, yet proud. Fen recoiled. They've crowned her. Elias's knees gave way. Then she's not here to end it. Fen's voice was barely audible now. No, she's here to carry it forward. The chandeliers above began to swing violently as if caught in a storm that hadn't yet arrived. Portraits shattered, doors slammed and reopened in new configurations. A grandfather clock somewhere deep in the house chimed once, two, hen again, then endlessly. Elias grabbed Fen's arm. We either find her now or this house will decide what we become. Fen nodded grimly, pulling a rusted dagger from beneath her coat, the same blade she had buried her father with. Then we go into the Bloodlines' heart. We go to the Ashford throne room. The hallway ahead bent in upon itself like a serpent ready to strike, but they stepped forward anyway, swallowed by the house's hungry design. The air thickened the moment they crossed the threshold into the throne room, a space long buried in legend and sealed behind generations of secrets. The walls bled with ancestral sigils, and the floors rippled with ash, as if memory itself was combusting beneath their feet. At the far end, the throne stood, not carved but grown, twisted from the blackened roots of the ancient ashford tree that had once stood at the center of the estate's courtyard before it withered in a single night of unnatural silence. On that throne sat the girl, her face no longer youthful but elongated, regal, pale, with veins of violet crawling like vines across her cheeks. Her eyes, once frightened, now held the void itself, ancient and vast. "Welcome," she said, her voice layered with echoes, hers, her mother's, her grandmother's, and something far older. "You've come to witness the inheritance." Fen stepped forward, dagger trembling in her grip. "This isn't you. This is the house speaking through you." The girl tilted her head. "Then who am I, Fen, if not the sum of the dead that raised me?" She raised her hand, and from the shadows spilled the forms of the Ashfords, hundreds of them, half-formed, decayed, some headless, others in splendor, all kneeling in solemn reverence. "They live here now, in me, in every mirror, every whisper. The house remembers because I have become its memory." Elias stepped beside Fen, voice cracking. "You're not bound yet. You can still walk away from this." The girl smiled, but it was the smile of someone who had seen every ending and grown fond of them all. "Walk away? And abandon the only truth this bloodline ever offered? No, Elias, I am not trapped. I am enthroned." A pulse rippled through the throne, and with it the entire room trembled. The house was shifting again, but this time not in chaos, in order. The corridors outside aligned like veins around a heart. He house had chosen its heir. "Then we destroy it," Fen whispered, holding out the dagger, but the girl laughed, and the laughter became thunder. "You cannot kill a throne with a blade. You must unseat its history, burn the name, bury the memory." The flames in the sconces turned blue, casting the room in a cold, ancient light. "So try, Fen. Try to forget us. Try to leave. But remember, every doorway leads back here now." Elias stared at the girl who had once been their salvation, now their monarch. And for the first time he understood. The house was not haunted. It was home. The storm outside began to swirl unnaturally, not around the house, but from it, as though the very structure exhaled centuries of contained grief, fury, and pride. The ground cracked beneath the foundation, roots bursting forth like veins pulsing with black ichor, wrapping the estate in a skeletal embrace. Fen dropped the dagger. It clattered on the marble floor, a useless symbol of rebellion in the face of an eternal system. Elias turned, pulling her toward the collapsing doorway. But every exit was gone. Where there had been corridors, now were walls. Where windows once framed the cursed countryside, there were only mirrors, infinite and repeating. They reflected not their escape, but the moments that had led them here, memories they had buried, choices they had justified, betrayals they had masked with silence. "It's rewriting," Elias muttered, realizing too late. "It's not holding us prisoner. It's rewriting our past so we never leave." The girl on the throne, no, the woman now, stood, her voice no longer layered but singular and divine. "This house doesn't trap. It offers purpose. You were always meant to return. That's why the blood called you back." Fen backed away from her own reflection, which was no longer her but a version of herself she didn't recognize, smiling, seated beside the throne, dressed in mourning robes. Elias shouted something, but it was lost in the rising howl of wind and memory. The mirrors began to fracture, and from each crack spilled versions of the Ashfords, alive, dead, dreaming, each stepping into the room like actors rejoining a play that had never ended. "This is our reckoning," the woman said. "You cannot defeat a legacy written in sacrifice and sealed in bone. You must become part of it, or disappear beneath it." Fen felt her hands tremble, not in fear, but in clarity. She understood now. The only way to dismantle a legacy was not to push it, but to change what it stood for. She rushed toward the throne, Elias at her side, not to attack, but to sit. The house stilled. The wind died. The echoes halted mid-cry. The Ashfords paused. Two heirs sat where once there was only one, and in that impossible act, something ancient cracked. Not the structure, but the story. The house didn't know how to be shared. It didn't know how to carry balance. It had only known tyranny. Until now, the silence that followed was not peace, but stunned hesitation, a living house unsure of its next breath. The spectral Ashfords, once so confident in their twisted resurrection, now flickered like uncertain candle flames in a breeze they did not anticipate. The woman on the throne tilted her head, the infinite eyes within her gaze narrowing into one. "You presume to split the will," she said, voice curdled with disbelief. "There has only ever been one seat." Fen answered without flinching. "Then that's the first lie we correct." Elias gripped the armrest, fingers white with pressure, staring down the writhing presence before them. The ancient rules, carved in bone, sealed in blood, spoken in screams, were unraveling thread by thread. The mirrors began to groan. They showed not domination, but compromise, moments the Ashfords had hidden away, alliances they'd destroyed in pursuit of purity. Now, reflected back, the echoes of what could have been stood shoulder to shoulder with what was. The girl queen screamed, not in pain but in rejection. "You desecrate the covenant," she howled. "This house was born of command, not consensus." Fen stood, then let it die of something better. She grabbed Elias's hand, and together they stepped down from the throne and into the center of the room. The moment their feet touched the original seal etched into the floor, the Ashford sigil ringed with chained runes, it glowed red-hot, then shattered, as though refusing to recognize their shared authority. The chains that bound the walls began to slither loose. The wind returned, not as a scream, but a breath. The house was deciding. Above them, the ceiling cracked to reveal the stormy sky, and in it, stars that had not been seen in centuries over the Ashford lands. The illusions faded, the wailing ceased. The dead Ashfords looked to one another as if seeing their crimes reflected in one another, Ours faces for the first time. And then, one by one, they bowed, not to power, not to fear, but to change. The house bent with them, groaning as it reshaped, as though accepting a rewrite of the narrative it had so long enforced. For the first time in its existence, it did not swallow those who defied it. It listened, and it began to forget what it meant to be cursed. But history, even when rewritten, never truly forgets. It only sleeps in new disguises. Though the house of Ashford bent to Fen and Elias, somewhere deep beneath the foundations, in a chamber older than the mansion itself, something remained untouched by light, law, or mercy. It had no name because names were given by the living, and this thing had never lived. It had only ever waited. As the echoes of allegiance faded and the halls calmed, a single sound echoed through the roots of the earth, a slow, deliberate heartbeat. It did not belong to Fen or Elias. It did not belong to the Ashfords. It belonged to the one who had built the Bloodlines, long before the name Ashford was ever spoken aloud. A mother without flesh, a father without soul. The architect of lineage, the house itself, not as wood or brick or curse, but as consciousness. It had allowed the revolt, the illusions, the throne to fall, not because it was defeated, but because it was evolving. Fen, standing in the courtyard now lit by stars, felt it like a shiver through her spine. The triumph they had just won pulsed with an aftertaste of unease, like an oath that had been signed in disappearing ink. Elias turned to her, eyes wide. "Did you feel that?" She nodded. "It's not over." Beneath their feet the soil stirred, not violently but rhythmically, as if something massive, something ancient was turning over in its sleep, roused not by rebellion but by recognition. The house had known this would come. It had nurtured the madness, the cycles, the throne, but it had also nurtured them. Fen and Elias were not accidents in the design, they were inevitabilities, fail-safes, or perhaps bait. The stars above them shimmered, and a distant tolling bell rang 12 times, though no clock tower stood for miles. In the quiet that followed, a new door appeared in the eastern wall of the courtyard, black, featureless, humming with pressure. Fen stepped toward it. Elias grabbed her hand again. "If we open it, we can't go back." She didn't look away. "If we don't open it, it'll come to us." They stood before the door. Behind them the ashes of the old family still cooled. Before them the unknown stretched, dark and breathing. The house had not ended, it had simply passed the burden forward. The door creaked open, not with a groan but with a sigh, like a beast exhaling after centuries of sleep. What lay beyond it wasn't a room but a corridor that defied dimension, its walls pulsing like veins and its air thick with the scent of memory long buried. Fen stepped inside first, her feet soundless on the shifting floor that felt neither solid nor liquid, but something in between, something alive. Elias followed, his breath caught in his throat, as the door sealed behind them without a sound. They were swallowed by the house's final secret, a secret too large for maps and too old for time. Along the walls were symbols in blood-red script that seemed to write themselves anew every few seconds, as if updating based on who walked the corridor. Fen paused, staring at a fresh line of symbols that bled onto the wall as she watched. She didn't know how she could read them, but she could. The heirs have entered. Judgment begins. The path narrowed. Lights, or perhaps eyes, blinked open in the darkness overhead. The ceiling was impossibly high, yet the presence above felt close, like the breath of a god holding its tongue. A low, melodic humming filled the corridor, notes not sung by instruments but by bone. With each step, memories that were not theirs began to flood their minds. Rituals performed in cold stone chambers, bargains struck in screams, promises whispered into dying ears. Elias staggered under the weight of them, clutching his head. "It's showing us everything," he gasped. "Every oath, every death, every betrayal." Fen grit her teeth. "It wants to see if we'll break." The corridor opened into a chamber without a ceiling, where the stars bled down like tears, and at its center stood a mirror, not made of glass but of shadow and whisper. This was the heart of the house, the original sin given form. The mirror showed not reflections but revelations. As Fen and Elias approached, it began to flicker with images. Fen, years from now, standing alone atop the house, covered in ash. Elias, hollow-eyed, chained in a chamber with no doors. Neither spoke. They knew what the mirror offered. Choices wrapped in consequences. Sacrifice or submission. Reign or ruin. The house did not punish. It tested. And the test had just begun. Fen raised her hand toward the mirror, her fingers trembling as they neared its shadowed surface. It didn't feel cold. It didn't feel warm. It felt like touching memory itself. 1,000 voices whispering through her skin, reminding her of every moment she'd doubted, every instance she'd hesitated, every quiet betrayal of herself. Elias stood beside her, wide-eyed, staring at his own reflection that wasn't him at all. In the mirror he saw a version of himself kneeling before a figure cloaked in threads of smoke and fire, a creature crowned with bones and silence, offering him a key that glowed like dying starlight. "It's showing us what we'll become," Elias said, voice low. "Or what it wants us to become," Fen replied. "This could be manipulation." But neither of them turned away. The mirror pulsed once, and in that pulse the chamber shifted. The walls fell away, replaced by a horizon of flame and ruin, cities they had never seen burned in the distance, while thousands of shadowed figures chanted the Grimsbane name with tongues stitched from silence. And above them all, a single tower, impossibly tall, reaching into a sky that bled. "This is the cost," the mirror whispered, the voice not aloud but inside their bones. "To end the legacy, the bloodline must be severed completely." Fen turned to Elias. "They want one of us to kill the other." Elias nodded slowly. "And if we don't?" The chamber answered for them. Beneath their feet, the floor split open, revealing a pit of endless darkness filled with writhing memories, echoes of all who had failed this test. They fell forever, screaming, burning in the shame of hesitation. "It's a lie," Fen said. "A trap meant to repeat itself again and again. The family kills itself, one heir left to carry the curse." Elias stepped back. "Then what do we do?" Fen stared at the mirror. "We refuse the frame. We choose not to choose." With that, she turned away. The mirror shuddered, cracked, and a howl echoed from the walls, not pain but disbelief. No air had ever done this. The chamber began to collapse. Stone screamed. Lights died. The mirror exploded into ash. And for the first time in centuries, the house trembled. They had broken the ritual. They had rewritten the rule. But the cost of defiance had not yet revealed itself. The dawn that followed was not warm nor bright, but it was real. For the first time in centuries, the Grimsbane estate stood in silence. Not the oppressive, haunted silence of watching eyes, but a hollow quiet like a church after exorcism. Fen and Elias emerged from the ruins of the ritual chamber, covered in dust and shadows, but alive. The house, once animate with ancient will, now felt like stone and timber again, heavy but emptied. Birds circled above, hesitant. The air no longer whispered secrets. Outside, the land stretched wide, its crooked trees straightening as if shrugging off a yoke they'd forgotten they bore. They had done it. They had refused the blood toll, denied the mirror's demands, shattered the Grimsbane inheritance of sacrifice. But they didn't speak. Not yet. There was too much to understand, too much to grieve. Fen walked to the threshold of the mansion, her boots crunching over glass and bone, the portraits lining the great hall, dozens of faces twisted in guilt and grandeur, now hung lifeless, their eyes no longer watching. Some had fallen to the floor, the frames broken, the canvas curling as if in shame. Elias followed behind, carrying nothing, not even memory. They reached the gate together, the same gate their ancestors had passed through as conquerors, witches, sinners, saints. As they stepped beyond it, something inside the estate sighed, like an ancient beast finally allowed to die. "What now?" Elias asked. Fen looked to the horizon. "We bury them all," she said. "Not just the bones, the stories, the fear, the name." "And what do we call ourselves?" he asked. She thought for a long time. "Survivors," she said. "Not heirs." Behind them, the Grimsbane house collapsed with a groan that sounded like a soul unshackled. The ground swallowed it whole, as if the earth itself had waited too long to forget. And from its dust no curse rose, no scream, no echo, only silence. A clean, final silence. The world, for once, was ready to begin.